I've got to say, this is a pretty intimidating group, and I was sort of hoping that the barbecue this afternoon was going to be a little bit better. And by that I mean, you know, iced tea. I thought a few whiskey sours would loosen everyone up, and you'd be ready for me. It's a happy coincidence that I follow on after my classmate, Frank Hill, who illustrated so compellingly the lack of Moreheads in public office. In my case, it's a matter of puzzlement that so few Moreheads enter journalism, given the importance of journalism and broadcasting in framing a nation's understanding of itself and of the world outside. When I went into journalism, I think I was probably the fourth Morehead scholar to do so. Just think about it. After 25 years at that stage, and after selecting at least 1,200 scholars, I believe, people chosen partially because of their potential for making an impact on society, almost none chose journalism. It's not my intention to surmise why it is, but rather to suggest how desperately America needs a new generation of bright young people who are committed to describing the world to the public at large in a way that not only draws them in, but provokes, explains, and challenges them to expand their worldview. For myself, I didn't come to Chapel Hill with an interest in media. In fact, at the time, I had a vague idea that I would teach, and anyway, my 19-year-old brain, such as it was somewhat distracted by the plethora of beautiful North Carolina women on campus. My interests in journalism were first stirred by a Morehead alumni, Jim Reston. Any of you who have seen the powerful movie Frost Nixon will know Jim, played by Sam Rockwell, as a tenacious, relentless researcher who badges the suave, shallow British talk show host David Frost into finally confronting President Nixon about Watergate. Jim is arguably the most junior member of the television team, but his moral indignation and understanding of the power of television and his belief in the responsibility of the journalist to seek out and share the truth with the public is critical, and it results in a moment of true historical significance when Nixon finally confesses that he's let the American people down. Jim, like many of us in the media, is working in a tainted, far from perfect environment. President Nixon is being paid more than $1 million to do the interview, and he's running rings around Frost, whom Jim will later describe in a Smithsonian Magazine article as a man with no discernible political philosophy and a reputation as a soft soap interviewer. Well, when I was a junior, Jim was teaching here, and I was lucky enough to sign up for his seminar, and it made me start considering journalism. Nowadays, I look back and think, what would have happened if Jim had not been the Watergate advisor for the Frost-Nixon interviews? How would the public's interpretation of Nixon and Watergate been affected if there hadn't been a relentless and idealistic young Morehead in that studio? The next event that provoked my interest in journalism was also Morehead-inspired. I applied for a Morehead travel grant. It was the first year of the travel program, and it was considered a reward for the 10 scholars who had towed the line most successfully on campus. I don't think I quite fitted that category, but I squeaked in as the token Brit. I went to Rhodesia, Zimbabwe in the midst of its civil war. I'm not quite sure that Mebane Pritchett thought, I don't know what he thought he was doing when he let me go there. I sometimes think that perhaps he hadn't looked carefully on the map of Africa. But it lit a fire, and I started to write and take photographs. Then, in a moment of what I will call youthful Morehead naivete, I decided to try to raise $250,000 to make a film examining why the American media had ignored African famine for so long. I thought I could do it in 3 months. It took 2 years to raise the money. Assignment Africa highlighted part of the problem we face. The American networks had cut down on coverage of Africa for years. In the 1980s, they had only one bureau on the entire continent. Today, I don't believe they have one. We are simply not being informed about huge numbers of the world's population, and it's not just in Africa. Afghanistan, before 9/11, springs to mind. Does this matter? I believe it matters immensely. We live in a world where, despite the arrival of the internet, people spend huge amounts of time watching television. I'm just back from London, and there the latest figures say people are watching TV for 4 hours and 2 minutes a day. Don't ask me how they worked out the 2 minutes bit, but it's mind-boggling. And before you all get too smug about those couch potato Brits, let me add that here in America, the number is more than 5 hours a day. Can you imagine it? It makes Candace's weekly reverential dose of Survivor look positively restrained. So what are people watching? Well, of course, there's some great entertainment and sport and some excellent news programs, but in many ways, I fear that TV continues to contribute to the dumbing down of America. The great CBS newsman, Edward R. Murrow, once said about television, "This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, and it can inspire, but it can only do so to the extent that humans are determined to use it to these ends. Otherwise, it is merely wires and lights in a box. There is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, and indifference." And that's the problem. All too frequently, we're not using television to these ends. You see, we need more Jim Reston-type figures at our television networks, pushing us to move beyond the banal to the enlightening, pushing us to ask tough questions. In 1995, I was in a trauma bay at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, directing a new television series called Trauma. It was for a channel called the Learning Channel. And I remember being told, "David, for God's sake, stop calling us the Learning Channel. From now on, we are simply TLC." And so that's how they became the channel, now best known for Here Comes Honey Boo Boo. A program that has been compared to watching a train wreck, and whose central characters have been described by Forbes magazine as a horde of lice-picking, lard-eating, nose-thumbing hooligans from, guess where, south of the Mason-Dixon line. The challenge is that these types of so-called reality programs are enormously popular and commercially successful. And so we need to make shows that are equally entertaining and popular, but will also have something worthwhile to say. In many areas, this is a battle that seems lost. Just look at the History Channel, which today is dominated by programs such as Ice Road Truckers and Axemen. They call it History Made Every Day. As for my former channel, National Geographic, ask the public what types of programs it broadcasts, and they'll say nature, adventure, and exploration. But take a second look. Today's scheduled programs include, this is for today only, World's Most Dangerous Drugs, Marijuana Nation, Drugged, High on Cocaine, Drugged, High on Ecstasy, I think there's a little bit of lack of imagination here, and Drugs Inc. Meth. And finally, if you decide that this really does indicate that the end of the world is more imminent than you realized, National Geographic offers at 10 p.m. Doomsday Preppers, Bugged Out, the End of the World as We Know It. All this from a not-for-profit organization established to increase and diffuse knowledge while promoting the conservation of the world's cultural, historical, and natural resources. Go figure. I played a part in founding the National Geographic Channel, and I understand the commercial ratings pressures that push programmers to prefer crime and drug shows over nature and conservation, over science and exploration, and over history, but I don't like it. And it's my good fortune to have been given a second chance to start up a new national channel as a joint venture between CBS and the Smithsonian Channel. Our Smithsonian Institution. Our challenge is to produce programming that is entertaining and that draws a broad commercial audience. But we are also determined to live up to the Smithsonian's name for credibility and integrity. It's at the heart of why I went into television. And it reinforces one of my core beliefs. You don't have to give up your youthful idealism, that quality that Morehead saw in you. Just hang on tight. Thank you.